I'm here to talk to you today about some more migration mapping. And this is work that is supported by the InfoGraphics Lab, by the people at the Wyoming Migration Initiative especially, and many more partners than that. So I thought I would start with just a little quick introduction to the InfoGraphics Lab where I work. We are a hybrid research and practice facility that works on creative projects related to space and place. For over 35 years, the lab has had a focus on using cartographic and data communication principles, which I hope you see throughout, to support research, instruction, and public service activities. We work with research partners to help identify and communicate spatial and temporal stories, to help organize data that's maybe already been collected, so we're not necessarily, and unfortunately, on the ground getting to pet the ungulates. But this takes many forms, from atlases to standalone websites with downloadable data to engaging in social media, images, and videos. One of the major collaborations of the InfoGraphics Lab is an over 10-year partnership with the Wyoming Migration Initiative. And the flagship publication from that partnership was Wild Migrations, the Atlas of Wyoming Ungulates. If you are curious and watching online later, what are ungulates, you may ask? They are hoofed mammals, many of which are shown here, and yes, that includes elephants. And while we do primarily map ungulate migration through this partnership, you may also catch a glimpse today of other migrating mammals, which are not ungulates, such as cheetahs and snow leopards. So these are the three atlases that I'll be discussing today: GIUM, the Global Initiative on Ungulate Mapping; CAMI, the Central Asian Mammals and Linear Infrastructure Atlas; and Western Migrations. I may use the acronyms throughout. These projects facilitate coordination among local wildlife biology experts, regional agencies, the migration science expertise of the Wyoming Migration Initiative, and the design and cartographic skills of our team at the University of InfoGraphics Lab, as well as one of our partners from Gauge Cartographics. Each project has both a print and web component, and you may be able to see at first glance that they share a common layout, but have different spatial extents: global, Central Asia, and the Western United States. So starting with GIUM, those watching in person just watched an in-depth presentation from Ian Freeman. And if you're watching at home later in the recorded videos, I suggest you go find Introducing GIUM by Ian Freeman. What I'll add is this is an international team of nearly 100 scientists, conservationists who joined forces to create the first ever global atlas of ungulate migrations, working in partnership with the conservation of migratory species of wild animals. As Matt Kauffman, director of the WMI, stated at the launch, GIUM is not only a mapping tool in the product we showed here, but a community of practice. As often happens in cartography, the process of map making is just as important to the participants as the products that are created. So one of the initial outcomes of GIUM was not, in fact, the atlas that we made here, but the initial meeting of these scientists and conservationists and cartographers in Grand Teton National Park, where the group met to share knowledge, best practice, and vision the atlas, as well as partake in collaboratory and participatory mapping exercises. So the second day of the workshop was dedicated to design and implementation, including a morning session focused on the design and approach of the atlas, as well as its integration with other data sources. In the afternoon, participants broke up into regional teams, such as the picture shown here, to capture collective knowledge about existing tracking data sets, anecdotal observations, and even draw directly on the map their knowledge of lost migrations. So here's just a quick tour of the video, or of the site. We do have 31 individual migrations, with more than a half dozen more in the production pipeline. They're organized by geographic region, and you can click to zoom to an individual migration. That can be expanded to display either a summary of the migration corridors or GPS tracks, such as the Formalian Cobb shown here. Additional data is available through the tabs, which links to a paired print product detailing similar information. And when I set this up, I had my live transcript on, and it is not right now. When this video ends, I may try and just add that. Oh, are they on? Oh, they're just not showing for me. Okay, great. There's a chance that's looping, so I am going to move forward. All right, so to move on into the next atlas, as I know we've had an in-depth discussion of GIUM already. We're producing a digital interactive environment for CAMI. In this case, a 70-page report that details 10 species of mammals in Central Asia. The report was focused on conflict areas between the migrating animals and linear infrastructure, such as road, rail, and fences. Here's an example here. So under the Central Asian Mammals Initiative, guidelines were developed to remove barriers of migration along the Trans-Mongolian Railway and to make infrastructure more wildlife friendly for species such as the Kulan, Mongolian gazelles, and Goiter's gazelles. The atlas aims to help decision makers plan and implement additional infrastructure projects or to mitigate and eliminate their barrier effects. So as you see here, we can scroll to a specific conflict area. That conflict being between the migratory animals and linear infrastructure. We can toggle on the specific infrastructure to see in detail what those are. For example, existing railway, existing fences, or planned railway and planned fences. So data sets that have been gathered and assembled by that group that you're not going to find existing already in OpenStreetMaps or Google Maps, right? The planned infrastructure especially. And we do drive, much like GIUM, our users to download the related print product to the species that they were just investigating. There we go. As you are starting to see, migration, the seasonal movement between non-overlapping home ranges, is complex and unique between each of the different species. But what is shared across scales is that the individuals track seasonably favorable conditions to forage for food or to avoid predation and other threats. However, for many species, the migratory journeys are negatively impacted by roads, fences, and other human development. So recognizing that, those threats, as well as the importance of ungulate migration, the Secretary of the Interior here in the States has signed the secretarial order improving habitat quality in western big game, winter range, and migration corridors in February 2018. This led to the Ungulate Migrations of the Western United States series. It's an annual conservation-focused publication commissioned by the U.S. Geological Survey to document seasonal migration routes and habitats of mule deer, elk, pronghorn, and other ungulates in the western United States. These migrations cover long distances and are threatened by, again, the linear infrastructure that we've discussed. These maps and reports provide critical information on each individual herd to help land managers, conservationists, and planners to make decisions using the best available data science in these big game migrations. So there are 5 volumes shown here, of which the InfoGraphics Lab helps design the individual maps within each. Volume 6 is in production right now. So what we're doing here is collaborating with USGS corridor mapping team on the mapping effort for these reports in order to bring together information from over 15 federal, state, and tribal agencies across 11 states. The migrations from these reports are combined into a single web interface. So like the other atlases, data from these print publications can be explored in an interactive environment or downloaded for further analysis. So not just the print reports themselves, but shapefiles that have, much like Ian said earlier, the individual tracking data is not provided, but the summarized and analyzed migration corridors can be downloaded for analysis. The goal is to provide data from states that do not necessarily host their own, as well as make it easier for requests for data instead of going by email to our USGS partners, but to have a download portal, as well as provide a high-level understanding of what is the coverage of migration across the western states. Unlike the other 2 that are currently in development and this are currently available online, this site is currently in development and review. So for this web map, I'm not sharing a QR code today. I do have a little demo though. So this shows us, there we go, looking at 250 herds, as I mentioned, across all 11 states. We can filter these by species. We can also jump to an individual herd. Looking at the very similarly symbolized symbology of high, medium, and low use. We can see the coverage of how many different administrators are responsible and land managers for the coverage of any particular herd, may they be federal, state, local, or private land that these species are migrating across. We do have the ability also to toggle on some of the individual routes and see some of the neighboring herds whose ranges overlap with this particular species. Rather than just going to individual herds, we can also filter the map by region or geographic extent or by land management administrative unit. In this case, looking at the total number of herds that we see in Idaho, some that only come in and out of the state. If they enter the state at all, they show up in this selection, with the neighboring herds grayed out in that sort of pale brown that are not in this selection. We can download the data for all 65 at once. Depending on data sharing agreements, which I'll talk about in a little bit. All right. So that was our little dive into the 3 different atlases. And coming back to this global view, thinking about what's shared and what's different between each. You can see how we represent the global collection, or global, not necessarily the globe, but the total collection differently in all 3. I'm going to use my laser pointer. Coming back to this, in GIUM, what we see is a collection of points that just show a centroid for each. Blank spots on the map here are not a lack of animal migration, but rather where contributions are coming, or we're hoping for them. Filling in the blank areas on the map is a call to inspire other biologists to add their data to the collection. This is a growing, living atlas. In CAMI, here, the overlap of migrations of the varied species were simplified into very generalized polygons, showing the vast shared spaces of these varied species. In Western migrations, we actually do show the outlines of the individual corridors themselves to show this coverage that these animals have across the geography of the space. You may also notice that each is using a different projection. A global-esque view that we see from Robinson, a globe view in Asia, and an Albers that we see for the Western states. We essentially have 2 scales that we design at, that global view we just looked at, and the all herds or species level, and the individual or detail level. In the detail, we always have a panel open that contains text that can be expanded in the modals, symbology, and unique layers to that specific herd. Which layers are introduced is an iterative process that our WMI team work out in the print maps with the local experts. A lot of that work is done by Ian Freeman, and the on-the-ground data providers. The analysis that we produce in the as well as the analysis that we produce in the migration corridors, such as the outputs from the Brownian bridge analysis that produce these polygons. All right. We also have this question of how do we represent neighboring herds? This question has been answered differently in each of the atlases. The extreme overlap that we see in CAMI sees us removing the other species from the view altogether, so I don't have it here. When you're looking at where the cheetah migrate, there is no data about the goitered gazelle. When you're looking at Western migrations, we have a toggleable layer that shows the extent of our other herds, and we have collapsed them down to a single point where there would be a lot of occlusion in GIUM. So how does this process look like? We have data collected on our individual animals. That coordination is done with local experts. That produces data analysis and supports reports. That turns into map design and web map design. All of that goes through a feedback exchange. So none of this is done in a vacuum, and all of this is iterative. From the technical side, this is our stack. We have meticulous, scale-based, and data-driven base map design that is different for each. That is completed in Mapbox Studio and through custom JavaScript and CSS. We then have a tile service which hosts all of our feature data for our migrations from the Wyoming Geographic Information YGISC. Sorry, YGISC, I forgot your acronym. This has been acronym soup today. But they support our vector tile layers for our migrations. For all of our attribute data, we actually use Google Sheets that we bring in and tie to our individual migrations by ID. We do this so our partners across the world can all be entering the data, and that is what drives what shows up in the panel, what a lot of the symbols that are used, and more details we can talk about after. We also have our downloadable print and JS material and mapping materials. Those get hosted on GitHub as well, and that comes together to produce the sites that you saw today. Other considerations that we have are really about credit and data sharing agreements. That funnels through the Wyoming Migration Initiative team and the USGS mapping team, who work with individual states or individual groups all around the world. What we do then is try and make that information available in a way that makes sense and UI that makes someone understand why is this data downloadable but not that. So for example, from Western migration, some data can be downloaded directly, but in other data we show in the map, we direct users directly to the individual state's download page. One thing we strongly rely on throughout GIUM and Western migrations and CAMI is a use of logos to recognize the contributions from our partners. That may look like logos from individual data providers or a link to view full sources in text. Some concluding thoughts that I have is that local work inspires collections of more local work, but at regional and global extents. That regional and global collections inspire and facilitate coordination. As I said earlier, these are communities of practice, not just the products that we're showing here. This work is possible due to years of developing successful styles and processes. One of the reasons I'm very proud and glad to have joined the InfoGraphics Lab is that this work is based on many years of work preceding me working there. I'll leave it there because I know that I'm at time, but thank you all for your time today, and I look forward to sharing more with you during the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Joanna. Do we have any questions?
Thank you. From a cartographic perspective, unquestionably amazing work. It is a monumental effort to bring data together, to put it out there. But from a conservation perspective, how much of this data in the public domain also, is there policy against publishing certain data sets for endangered species to mitigate against poaching?
Right, so this is a really common question that we receive, and so from my perspective, again, I'm answering also as a cartographer, so I'm hoping to make sure that I get the answer as best that I can, knowing that I would also turn you to groups like the Wyoming Migration Initiative for answers. One that I would say is, at least when we're looking at in the US with Western migrations, conservationists are often hunters, and we're not as much worried about the idea of poaching with those species who are less endangered. Again, we're not sharing the specific GPS collar data or necessarily the timing either of where they might be. And a lot of this data is available as broad information about where an entire herd is migrating seasonally. So there's not, the downloadable data isn't going to inform where someone should set up a blind. When it comes to endangered species that are red listed, things like that, we have similarly very aggregated representations of the data that are showing it at a regional level, and the high, medium, and low use corridors are what are downloadable. More detailed than that, I think, is this the Oscars? Do I have to? I think that we can continue the conversation later. Wow.